The first time Leora noticed the shadows were thicker than the people they belonged to, she was 6, and small enough to squeeze between crates in the wharf district. She remembered standing on the salt-stained boards, watching dockhands coil rope, while the entire pier seemed to sit beneath a soot-black awning, as if the sun itself had been smothered. Everywhere she looked, silhouettes clung to ankles and elbows like iron weight. They shivered whenever their owners tried to straighten, and they whispered whenever someone dared to speak above a hush. Years later, most called this place Umbra, the city of shadows. But Leora's grandmother had whispered a harsher name, Sorrow's Market. By the time Leora reached 16, she had learned that Umbra bought and sold sadness the way other towns traded rice or silk. Loneliness drew customers, and customers fed the coffers of the elders, the 6 veiled magistrates, who ruled from their high balconied hall. The elders never appeared without thick cloaks and lanterns whose glass had been clouded on purpose, ensuring no one could see their faces, or the lamp's true flames. They preached safety, order, survival. They banned music after sunset. They regulated laughter to approve festivals, and they forbade anything that might thin the shadows, especially color. Leora disobeyed in secret. She worked afternoons in her grandmother's attic, mixing pigments from rust flakes, crushed marigold petals, and the bluest powder scraped from broken tiling near the abandoned observatory. Her brush was a stub of reed wrapped in cat fur. Her canvas at first was nothing but discarded burlap sacks. She painted not images but possibilities, a single feather balanced on a breath of wind, a door cracked open to a garden, the curve of a smile that had not yet bloomed. The colors glowed in the dimness as if unbothered by the city's gloom, as if confident they could outshine it when the time came. The time came on a Wednesday morning, mottled by low clouds. Leora carried a satchel heavy with jars of color to the marketplace, which wound like a serpent between tottering tenants. She set up near a shuttered fountain under a basilisk statue whose stone eyes had been gouged out long ago. Most passers-by ignored her, hurrying toward breadlines or scrap dealers, but an old man with smoke-gray beard and bent shoulders paused. His shadow lay under him like a spilled inkwell. Its edges were so dark they seemed to drink the light from everything nearby. "I tune pianos," the old man croaked, gesturing to the empty space beside him, where one might imagine a magnificent instrument waiting. But no one plays anymore. Fingers too cold, hearts too tired. Leora looked directly at the man, then at the silhouette shackling his shoes. "May I paint you?" He laughed, startled by the boldness. "Paint what?" "There is hardly anything left." "There is," she said, opening her satchel. "It's simply hidden." Before he could refuse, she knelt, dipped her brush into a jar of cobalt brighter than sea under noon, and touched the rim of his shadow. The color sank in, crackling like ice meeting flame, and began to spread of its own volition. It framed the man's outline first, then streaked across chest and arms until his silhouette shone blue as summer sky. The marketplace hushed. People sensed something shift, even pigeons hopped nearer, flicking their wary red eyes. The old man straightened, his back clicked, but did not protest. When he inhaled, his ribs lifted, not as a cage, but as bellows. From somewhere deep beneath musty coat and ash-colored beard, a song arose, a simple arpeggio. Notes shaped by lips but accompanied by no instrument, yet everyone heard ivory hammers and tempered strings. Invisible chords reverberated off the shutters. Children peeked from doorways. A vendor dropped her sack of wilted kale. The air, for a heartbeat, tasted of possibility. When the last note faded, murmurs flooded in. Some carried gratitude, others fear. The elders and specters, thin men with polished boots and mirrors instead of badges, pushed through the crowd. Leora wiped her brush on a rag and slipped away before questions could net her. She did not have to glance back to know the old man's silhouette remained blue beneath him, refusing to dim. Word of the girl with color spread faster than sunrise, and soon strangers followed Leora's errands through alleyways, hoping to be chosen. She was careful. She painted only when certain the inspectors were elsewhere, and she fled each time applause threatened to swell. Still, rumors ballooned. People began to imagine what colors they would wear if ever she touched their darkness. Vermilion for courage, jade for forgiveness, amber for joy. The elders convened an emergency session behind curtained arches. They decreed any unauthorized pigment a tool of sedition. Barrels of imported dye were seized, painters were questioned, flogged, or vanished. Leora's grandmother, Mira, stitched quilts no one bought anymore. She confronted her granddaughter one dusk, candle trembling in arthritic fingers. Child, rebellion wears many masks, but yours is too bright. The elders will come, Leora answered with a whisper. Then let them see what we see. For weeks, she continued, moving along Umbra's spine like dusk's own breath. She painted an apprentice baker whose parents had died of the gray fever, revealing in him swirls of gingery orange. His bread soon rose lighter than any had tasted in years, scented with cardamom and laughter. She painted a shy midwife in honey tones. Next morning, the woman marched to the magistrate's hall and demanded increased rations for pregnant women. She painted a crippled ex-soldier in streaks of magenta, and the man found rhythm in his once shaking legs, teaching children how to dance, the forgotten reel of river days. Every time Leora colored a silhouette, part of the street around that person brightened. Whipans cleared of grime, tarnished bells regained polish, weeds broke into chrysanthemum bloom. The changes were small, but collectively they terrified the elders, who derived power from scarcity. They hired more inspectors, armed them with lanterns whose light burned cold as lunar stone. Notices were nailed to doors. Beware false prophets who promise color. Shade is safety. Leora slept little, haunted not by fear for herself, but by an unspoken question. Who would paint the one painter? Each morning, her own shadow lengthened heavier along floorboards, sapping her energy. Color, she realized, was a gift she siphoned from unseen reservoirs, but every siphon demanded something back. She began leaving footprints of ash where she walked, as though bits of her were crumbling. Then came the evening when the elders baited a trap. They arrested a young street violinist named Tavi on charges of unlicensed melody and scheduled his public trial at the Plaza of Hollow Victories, under the high scaffold where dissidents were displayed in iron cages. Leora had never met the boy, but she knew of his music, rumored to make stone tremble and saplings sprout. She also knew despair would thicken citywide if he fell unanswered. So she prepared her boldest act yet, to paint at noon before thousands, daring Umbra's rulers to see unfiltered brilliance. On the morning of the trial, Leora dressed in a shawl embroidered by her grandmother, patches of sky, leaf, and ember no decree had dimmed. She filled 7 jars, one for each hue of daybreak. At the plaza, citizens gathered under watchful inspectors. The scaffold loomed. Tavi stood shackled, bow confiscated, calluses on his fingers dirt-caked and trembling. Sagging, his shadow looked not black, but brittle, like dried blood. Leora slipped through the throng, heart-punching rhythm against ribs. She reached the rope barrier a breath before the elders emerged onto their balcony, veiled and lantern-bearing. An inspector shouted back, but curiosity stilled the crowd. Even fear paused to see what colors might bleed. Leora climbed onto a crate, raising her brush like a thin banner. Wind tugged her braid. Umbra, she cried, your talents are not crimes. They are light looking for form. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. See what happens when we stop fearing our own radiance. She upended the first jar, sunburst yellow, flinging it high. The pigment burst in midair, then cascaded as mist, settling onto dozens of shadows near her. Wherever droplets landed, individuals gasped. A potter doubled over, seeing her silhouette shift to molten gold. A lamplighter's outline shimmered saffron, and his lamp, though unlit, glowed. The crowd murmured, awe-edged with panic. Inspectors surged, batons raised. Leora dodged, uncorking the second jar crimson like ripe pomegranate. She brushed it across the rope barrier itself, fibers smelted into a ribbon of warm silk, which drifted above heads before drifting onto Tavi's wrists, unwinding the shackles as though locks were illusions. His arms free, the violinist reached instinctively for an instrument that was not there. Leora saw the yearning and, with her third jar of deep viridian, painted a violin into existence within his shadow. The moment her brush stroked the tucked chin rest, an actual violin, wooden, cherry-varnished, materialized in Tavi's hands, humming to be played. Silence arrested the plaza. Even the elders' lanterns dimmed as if intimidated. Tavi raised the bow, drew a tentative note, then another. With each vibration, colors Leora had spilled brightened exponentially, feeding on harmony. The very stones underfoot blushed rose. The sky parted, exposing a wedge of true sun Umbra had not witnessed in years. An Inspector Lung seized Lyora's arm, pain pinwheeled up to her shoulder, and her remaining jars toppled, shattering. Teal, orchid, and pure white splattered across cobbles and boots. Lyora heard the crowd gasp as the inspector's own shadow, soaked by accidental turquoise, began to reveal itself. Inside the blackness flickered faint silhouettes of books, quills, a child at a desk. Memories of a scholar he once had wished to become. The inspector stumbled back, dropping his baton, staring at his transformed outline with wet eyes. The effect rippled. Onlookers realized the colors did not wound, they uncovered. Doubt cracked like brittle plaster. One woman stepped forward, dipping fingers into the pooled orchid, then smearing it across her chest. Her shadow bloomed lavender, and she began to sing the lullaby her mother had taught her before the gray fever claimed half the district. Others followed, kneeling in paint, laughing, weeping. The elders reacted. Their tallest member lifted a lantern and unscrewed the glass, revealing the flame, or not a flame, but a shard of darkness, so dense it devoured surrounding light. A hush collapsed over the plaza as the shard's gravity pulled at color. Pigments ebbed from silhouettes crawling across stones toward the lantern like spilled wine retreating to a cup. Leora's knees buckled. She felt energy yank from her marrow. Fear reasserted itself. The crowd recoiled. Tavi's bow faltered mid-stroke. His violin faded to translucence. The old man she had first painted, months prior, piano tuner blue-stepped from the mass, his cobalt silhouette flickering as if it might extinguish. "Hold fast," he shouted, voice accord, but even he looked uncertain. Leora understood that the elder shard was the singularity at Umbra's core, a throne of concentrated absence. All color had to pass it on the way to sunlight. The magistrates had simply hidden it within ritual and decree. She glanced down at her own shadow and saw it thin to a spectral outline. It had no color because she had never painted herself. Suddenly, she knew what reservoir she had been siphoning, her unexpressed potential, her unclaimed hue. The inspector who'd dropped his baton caught her eye. Tears streaked his cheeks, washing dust into pale streams. He whispered, "You showed me what I threw away. I will not lose it again." Then he broke rank, turning lantern outward so its ordinary flame combated the elder's shard, projecting warmth that slowed the pull of darkness. Leora seized the last intact jar indigo near black, a pigment she had saved without knowing why. She spoke to the inspector, to Tavi, to every newly colored silhouette. "I need one stroke," she said. "But it must be on the canvas that frightens me most." With that, she knelt and angled the brush toward her own shadow. Her hand shook, yet steadied, as fingers closed around long-gathered certainty. She painted a single spiral across her silhouette's heart. Indigo sank in, then erupted outward, not as addition, but as culmination. A kaleidoscope of uncountable hues, colors that did not fit names. Starlight turned liquid, memory turned dew. The spectrum vaulted into the air above her like a meadow unfurling in 3 dimensions. The shard within the elder's lantern screamed, a sound without vibration, felt in bones more than ears. Cracks webbed its surface, leaking darkness that dissipated, unable to resist simultaneous wavelengths. One by one, the lanterns of all 6 magistrates shattered, scattering shards that fizzled to dust before touching marble. Their cloaks, once an impenetrable dye, bleached until threadbare. Underneath, the elders were not ancient sorcerers, but gaunt citizens like any other, pallid from years hiding behind law. Sunlight poured unobstructed across the plaza. Color once trapped in pigment joined color native to the world, and together they formed transparency clarity in which nothing false could maintain outline. People gasped, blinking against brilliance. Shadows thinned to gentle outlines, the way nature once intended, companions rather than wardens. Some disappeared altogether, replaced by halos of reflected light. Leora felt warmth flood her limbs, mending the fractures fatigue had carved. The brush in her hand melted into pure energy and rose, taking station above crowd like a new sun. Then, as if its task were complete, it fragmented into motes that rained down, sticking to any surface that needed remembering. Door frames, palms, cracked lips, cello strings, coiled asleep in attics. An enormous quiet settled, vibrant rather than oppressive. The old piano tuner clasped the wrists of the nearest former inspector. The lamplighter with saffron outline hugged the baker's shimmering orange. Nobody seemed to know whether to laugh or kneel, so they did both. Teavi played again, this time not to combat dread, but to dress joy in melody. His notes collided with still, lingering motes, chiming like bells. Mira, Leora's grandmother, arrived breathless, pushing through bodies to clutch her granddaughter's face. You foolish marvel, she scolded between sobs. Leora rested her brow against the woman's, inhaling the scent of quilted cotton and rosemary oil. Over Mira's shoulder, Leora saw the city's horizon. They had one, she realized, she had simply never noticed, where buildings ended and fields began, luminous with after-rain glitter. Clouds moved as themselves, not as portents. For the first time since Leora could remember, Umbra was only a name, not a verdict. In the following days, committees replaced magistrates, but titles mattered less than shared purpose. Citizens volunteered to scrub soot from windows, repaint shutters, repair the long silent aqueduct. They argued, certainly. They were human, and humans quarreled. Yet their disagreements stood in fresh air, not in dens of manipulated sorrow. Leora traveled street to street, teaching anyone interested how to mix pigments, how to listen for the moment a color wished to be born. Children proved most adept. They laughed when paint dripped down wrists, and their laughter fortified alleys. Not everyone wanted brightness. Some missed the certainty of regulated dusk. They lingered in back lanes that remained naturally cool, clutching old fears as talismans. Leora did not force them forward. She offered jars, instructions, a listening ear, and left choice to them. Color, she had learned, could not be beaten into skin. It had to be courted, respected. One evening, she returned to the fountain where it all began. The basilisk statue still glared over chipped stone, but someone had painted its eyes emerald, so instead of menace, it looked contemplative. Leora sat on the rim, feet dangling alongside a toddler who traced circles on water's surface. The child's silhouette flickered a dozen colors in rapid succession, undecided about which story to tell first. Leora smiled, recognizing the restlessness. She glanced at the skyline where scaffolds had been dismantled, where balconies now hosted impromptu concerts and vines given freedom, climbed toward lamps repaired to shine warmly rather than glower. The city was imperfect, still poor, still grieving past cruelties, but it was breathable. And its breath smelled of wet clay, fresh rye, and the faint mineral tang of pigment. A voice behind her spoke, soft yet resonant. Painter of silhouettes. Leora turned to find the inspector, turned scholar, no longer in uniform, holding a slim notebook. His shadow, in gentle turquoise, held a quill. I'm collecting stories, he explained. Origins of color, the manner in which fear unravels. He hesitated. May I write yours? Leora pondered, then shook her head. Write everyone, she said. Mine is just a brushstroke in the mural. She rose, handing him a small jar of indigo, saved from the plaza. For revisions, she added with a wink. The scholar accepted, humbled. Night approached, but darkness did not press the city down. It merely signaled rest, dreaming, an invitation to use cooler palettes. Lanterns came alive, each trimmed wick offering gold rather than gray. Somewhere, a piano sounded, confident in its returning role. Somewhere else, someone danced, toes tapping new dust from old stones. Leora walked home alongside her grandmother, shawl in one hand, empty satchel in the other. Her own shadow kept pace, no longer burden, no longer unknown. It shimmered with quiet color that changed like the underside of clouds at dawn. Not demanding attention but incapable of hiding. Whenever street lamps passed over them, their silhouettes intertwined briefly, two patterns overlapping to form a third. And from that mingled outline, sparks floated up, tinny, ember-like flecks, too quick to classify, yet bright enough to be noticed by anyone still searching for a reason to step from shade into light.